Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the November 20th Newberg City Council meeting. I call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
All right, Counselor McBride,
Here.
Counselor Wheatley,
Here.
Counselor Yarnell Holloman,
Here.
Counselor Kilberg,
Here.
Mayor Rosacker,
Here.
Counselor Olson,
Here.
and Counselor Carmen is absent tonight.
Thank you. Shall we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. Tonight, we have a proclamation. This is definitely one of the things that qualifies for proclamation in my mind. This is a proclamation declaring November 25th, 2023 as Small Business Saturday. Whereas the government of Newberg, Oregon celebrates our local small businesses and the contributions they make to our local economy and community. And whereas according to the U.S. Small Business Administration, there are 33.2 million small businesses in the United States. Small business represent 99.7% of firms with paid employees. Small businesses are responsible for 62.7% of the net new jobs created since 1995, and small business employ 46.4% of the employees in private sector in the United States. Whereas 68 cents of every dollar spent at a small business in the United States stays in the local community, and every dollar spent at small businesses creates additional 48 cents in local business activity as a result of employees and local businesses purchasing local goods services. Whereas 72% of consumers reported that Small Business Saturday 2022 made them want to shop and dine small, independently owned retailers and restaurants all year long. Whereas the Newberg, Oregon supports our local businesses that create jobs, boost our local economy, and preserve our communities. And whereas advocacy groups, as well as public and private organizations across the country, have endorsed the Saturday after Thanksgiving as Small Business Saturday. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Mayor and City Council of Newberg, Oregon do hereby proclaim November 25th, 2023 as Small Business Saturday, and urge the residents of our community and communities across the country to support small businesses and merchants on Small Business Saturday and to shop small throughout the year. In witness thereof, I have hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the city of Newberg to be affixed this third day of July, 2023. That's not the right date. Let's say this 20th day of November, 2023. How'd that get by us, huh? Little levity. Where is our city? What are you doing over there?
I decided to come over here because I wanted to be closer to my team, every one of whom I really trust.
And the food.
And the food.
That's enough food. Well, it is time for the city manager's report, which we all.
Okay, some more fresh and delicious statistics coming up in just a moment. Here we go. Now, we don't know if the clicker is going to behave today, and we're going to find out. The thing has a mind of its own, I swear. There we go. Okay, so we have a very packed agenda today, so I'm going to rattle through. Planning, combined planning decisions of all sorts, 7, down a bit from the average from last year. Building permits for housing units, 6, down from the average of last year. And as we've heard from the planning department, the building rate is slowing down. Building permits, other types, 98. Building inspections, still a whopping 544 inspections done mostly by just one bloke, with a little bit of help from part-timers. But that's an incredible number of inspections. 7 submissions through the website. Community engagement, social media engagements, 4,113 engagements to various interested parties. And social media land, love it or hate it, it's not going anywhere. Facebook, 3,991, Twitter, 434, LinkedIn, now known as X, 325. Oh wait, Twitter, sorry. That shows that your city manager spends no time whatsoever on social media. There was $1.89 million of accounts payable and 1.05 of payroll. And while I'm on this topic, the 3 highest check amounts were the Saunders Company for Elliott Road, $462,834.80. Axon Enterprises for the annual body camera subscription program, $83,145, and Eagle Elsner 64921.63 for pavement improvement projects. HR activity, recruitments advertised 5, hires 0, separations 1, and claims of all sorts 4. And notice, as I always say, a claim is not necessarily a bad thing. It's often just related to a medical injury or something that needs to be followed up. It's not always a really bad thing. IT resolved 296 service tickets for the city and responded to 2 after-hours on-call events. Library activity, the door count was 7,822, and there was 26,018 circulation events, showing considerable recovery on those numbers since COVID wrapped itself up. Public safety, 2,334 calls for service, and public safety conducted 494 traffic stops. 467 citations and warnings were issued. And unfortunately, there were 7 DUI stops. In the world of dispatch, 881 911 calls, 3,154 non-emergency calls resulted. In terms of water, the production number for delicious, clean, fresh water was 87.2 million gallons, and an almost comparable number of 79.175 million gallons of the other stuff was dealt with. There was 1,329 work orders, and as you've seen from the trends, work orders completed sometimes do slow down when the weather gets very rainy. And in terms of energy production, 47.75 million kilowatt hours of energy were generated, and now we're on, of course, the downward path for solar energy. So that is the total for our numbers through the end of September. I should have mentioned earlier that there was advertisements run at that time for Public Works Tech 1, Tech 2, and police laterals were some of the positions that we had advertised. But we have also achieved full staffedness recently, and not counting any other positions that we may add in the future, we are currently where all the cities would like to be. And I believe that's pretty remarkable. Good. Any questions? Thank you most kindly.
Thank you, Will. And I'm a little bit proud of the fact that you and I are probably the only people in the room that don't know the difference between LinkedIn, Twitter, and X.
I don't.
And Mike. So we have public comments. I'm gonna move, Jim Tault's down into the proper area for that thing. So do we have anybody online to make comment? All right. I will close public comments. And now, I don't see Jim Tault here. Okay. Okay. So we have a discussion item for the Newberg Affordable Housing Commission. I trust that everybody has read Jim's letter. It's going to spark some conversation. I know that our staff has been doing some work on this issue. Will, who is willing to?
Yes, so the public comment item, if it was shifted further down in the agenda, it would go down to
Okay.
10A.
Thank you. You're right. So the scoping the childcare issue is the next thing on our agenda, and that's going to be Molly Olson.
Evening. Given the length of the agenda, I'm not going to read this to you. That's probably really good. I don't know who has the clicker, but I want to acquaint you with what's in there.
And it's working.
Excellent. Acquaint you with what's in the presentation, but not dwell on a bunch of stuff, right? This is just work that's been done. Hopefully. Am I pointing in the wrong place?
No, it's the left.
No.
I think we're gonna just give up on this thing. New slide, please.
No slide, please. Oh, it's a microphone. New slide, please.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, so basically just, this is a page that tells you what's been done. It's a little out of date now, but basically sat down to look at the study the county did, the state of Oregon, what they're saying about childcare availability, interviews with people who are in the childcare business. So CPRD, several daycare providers are listed there. Also with businesses, because they're GFU, ADEC, and DCI have all said when they talk to their employees, number one or number two is daycare. And so this is important for our economic development. So a lot of work has been done just trying to ask people, what issues do you see around childcare in Newberg? Because people come to open and then they don't open a childcare. They go to Salem, they go to McMinnville, all around us, but not here. And so what would you be willing to work with us to understand this? And so if we go to the next slide. If it will let you. Okay. This is just this slide just tells you it's a fairly complex problem that we're working on. The state, the county, and the city all have laws that regulate childcare. The providers of childcare, we found out during COVID that indeed our public schools are in the business of childcare. Not what we think of as extra, but so it's the K through 12 schools, CPRD, variety of commercial centers, whether they're for profit or not, churches, and home-based childcare. Employers are really worried about availability, especially for infants. I know Elise had real problems finding people, and Rachel has also had challenges. They would like to be able to supply it on site and are willing to put stuff in, and it has to be affordable. So that's a huge trick. If y'all have children, you know that it costs as much as your mortgage to have children in childcare. Families need full-time, they need pre and post school once their kids are in first through full day school. And then again, affordability is a big deal. So if you go to the next slide, if it will let you. Basically, these are just the learnings, but what I want to do is not dwell on a lot of these. There's some code, there's some zoning, there's some things that we have in our city code and in our zoning that could make it easier for people to open a childcare center here. There are things that other cities have done. So that's probably the biggest takeaway in government. Staffing is an issue for everybody right now, but it's been quite an issue in the childcare arena. So I'm not going to read these all to you because they're in the recommendation at the end. So if we go to the next slide. Please. I'm really talking to your computer. Yeah. There, it's the problem statement is there's not adequate affordable daycare in Newberg. People are driving to Beaverton, Tigard, Sherwood, McMinnville. Employers see this as a #1 retention and productivity issue. So when we're recruiting businesses to move here, that's one of the questions they asked about. And then daycare providers have chosen not to open due to high costs and difficulty getting a site open in Newberg versus other cities. So the request to council is I've actually listed the issues that let's have staff take a look at it. We don't need another ad hoc committee. Let's have staff take a look at the stuff we've already identified that can make us on par with other cities, prioritize it, right? They've got a lot on their plate, and see what we could do to remove those barriers. So we don't need another committee because we're killing Rachel with the number of committees we have. Actually, she's not dead yet, but anyway. So that's the request to council. If you guys agree, then we just hand this off to our city manager who, yeah, Clay might have already heard about this during our get acquainted walk. And so there's other people who can take a look at this and maybe pretty quickly tell us what we can do and what we can't do. So I think that's the request. Any questions?
Honourable councillors, I would make an observation that many of these things are clearly good objectives and good goals, but our approach, I would suggest, would have to be somewhat linear. In other words, to tackle them one at a time rather than try to do all of these things at once, because we don't have the capacity to do that. So I just wanted to say that if it is the will of council to scope this further, I would want to kind of methodically work through these ideas instead of trying to create some giant package, because these are all over the code and they're all over the operating area.
In light of that, then is this list under government prioritized, or would you have a recommendation for what order these things would be checked into?
In that list, I don't know if we can go back to let's see, interview results. There's really 4 that lie within the power of the city of Newberg to do something about it. We go down one, I think down another one. There it is. If you look under government, the SDCs are too high. Woohoo! We already took care of that. So that was a huge one.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. I mean, it's in process being taken care of. The process of getting a more customer service oriented planning process is happening already. This isn't a new request. Going from paper to electronic, they're also working on that. City code for home businesses, that needs a fix to be aligned with the state. Zoning, getting rid of conditional use permits where other cities don't require it. Look into it, see if there's a reason we should keep it. If not, simplify. Parking requirements. If you go by a daycare, you will see a parking lot full of empty spaces, and it's expensive. So if there are things that we can do in our code that make sense to the planning department, because we are not planners and we don't know the state laws and all that. So if in my conversation with Clay on this during our get acquainted walk, I said, you look at it and tell us what we can do and what we can't, and then do it as your workload permits, because they have all sorts of things that have to be responded to in a timely fashion. We need to solve this, but it's not on, if we get done gradually, it's okay, we'll manage, right? So I think the things up here are there. The STC was the super big one, Peggy, and that one's like in process. So, and the rest just discourage people, but
the parking requirements, that's huge too.
oh yeah, but again,
But,
planning could
you
look
know,
at that.
that would be if we could, but see, it seems like that shouldn't take too much time to be able to figure out
We'll let them tell us.
what we could do, so.
Yeah.
I think we could solve this probably fairly quickly.
No, my light, can I go? Have we thought about, I guess, from a staff perspective, what we could do to support our staff with childcare needs as an employer? So not just the government, I would also be interested in us seeing ourselves as an employer for our staff with childcare needs.
I think I didn't tackle this as because the council doesn't have, we don't run daycares, but we do get in the way of people running daycares. So my thought was if we remove barriers, people will open them here and there will be slots for people. So that's as far as I went with that. City is a big employer, without a doubt.
It just reminds me of the conversation that we had with the school district and them feeling like they were not a daycare and us posing the question, but you are an employer. And so I'm
Yeah.
just challenging back towards us that it would
Mhm.
also apply towards us as a large employer to be asking ourselves the question of how we're supporting our staff that may have daycare needs.
Right. So that could be kind of a question to your employees.
I mean, I think clearly one approach to answer that might be to do some kind of market force thing where if we had a certain number of bookings with a service provider, that we would get a preferential rate for staff. The same type of approach that other large employers would follow. So that does make a lot of sense to me. I think I would say that, well, maybe I'll pivot to Clay. Clay, do you have what you need right now to have some sense about prioritizations amongst these list of items?
Yes. So looking at the interview learnings and why, it's a pretty clear list. Also listening, we can obviously see some areas to work in. And so if the council chooses to direct staff, we can have staff work on this. And one of the things that the community development department is planning on doing in the next month to 2 months is coming back with a project list to go over with city council what our priorities are and what our work tasks are to make sure we're on the same page with the city council. And so one of those things can be adding this to the list if we're asked to start working on something like this, making sure it's on there.
All right, shall we move on to the emergency operations plan?
Can we close with is there agreement to ask staff to look at this? We have to ask them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you all cool?
Coolness detected.
Okay.
Oh, who is presenting the emergency operations plan? There we go.
Good evening. I'm here to present your emergency operations plan update. My name is Karen Carmichael and I am your city emergency coordinator. Next slide, please. So we're here to present an update to the emergency operations plan. The emergency operations plan is one of the cornerstones that lays out our guidelines for mitigation, preparation, responding to and recovering from emergencies and disasters of all sizes here in the city. Next, please. Your plan is going to define your scope and standards of care, your roles and responsibilities for your city agency. It provides a community overview and known hazards, policies, lines of succession, communication and operational formats, agreements for mutual aid with our partners and other agencies, local, state, and federal obligations and authorities. Couple of reasons why we are updating this plan. Council goals is a significant part of that. It is essential to have an integrated agile response plan for the protection of your staff, your residents, and the community's resiliency. It was deemed as a priority for the city department heads also, and more importantly, it is 10 years out of date. Next one, please, sir. It was designed in 2012 and approved in 2013, one decade ago, using a grant that was a one-size-fits-all that pretty much reads the same in almost every city, county, and state agency. In addition to that, it didn't handle any of our individual culture, our capabilities, our resources. On top of that, we no longer run a fire department in the city. And although Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue has brought us a lot of benefits, we lost that city employee that keeps our plans current and provides us with training and expertise. In addition to that, the plan being 10 years old means a lot of things are not in the plan that are now part of our everyday response. Urban wildfires are a regular problem and risk to the city. Health pandemics were not in the plan. They were in hospital plans and county health plans. They were not in everybody's plans. Cybersecurity risks are a huge burden, and that's in almost every operation of the city now. There is technology everywhere you look, and that includes satellite technology. So now solar issues are a concern. We have heat and drought issues regularly. All these routine things needed to be added into our plan. So in April of 2022, we got started in creating a new plan for the city. This is a hybrid of the old format that came from the consultant, but it has our capabilities and resources, is better suited to our staff, our equipment, and our abilities. The framework is scalable. It can be small, like a snowstorm, or it can be catastrophic. It is compatible with our partner agencies. It is clear in its roles and identified duties, and it follows the tried and true ICS structure that is standard across the country and half of the world. It has individual appendixes, grab and go checklists, things that are adjustable. We can add to it without rewriting the entire plan.
One of the key things that we realized back in 2022 was, and this was really a COVID lesson, when you have a ossified and fixed plan with only one linear response to each specific type of disaster, that's no good. We wanted the new plan to be more like a toolkit that we could build a response to whatever the unfolding disaster was, and therefore make it more agile and also more realistic.
Yeah. So the plan that we're bringing to you has, well, not next session tonight, includes that improved scope, the framework, the operations that we need. It fits all the required FEMA standards. It's compliant with state and federal regulations. It is clear in its roles and responsibilities and limitations on where our scope is and isn't. It includes appendices that are very clear, such as Appendix A, which impacts council and declarations of emergency. It has procedures, and it is simplified. It is 149.5 pages shorter with less text speak, more regular conversation, fewer pages, because let's be honest, at 2 a.m., the guy or gal who has been here 3 years needs a grab and go. So one of the questions that I'm sure we're all wondering is how we're going to keep this one from becoming a decade old. There are a couple things we all have embraced at the city, and I hope you all do. This is a living, breathing document. It needs care and feeding. It is not a one and done and put on the shelf. The appendixes are all current as of September 23. Obviously, a few weeks have gone by since that was last done. It will be updated regularly. In addition to that, in April 2022, I was designated full-time to do nothing but emergency coordination. So my job is to make sure it stays current, to check in with department heads and they to check in with me to let me know when there's a change to regulations, partnerships, equipment, procedures, and no less than every 4 years as we see the mayor each cycle. And maybe.
New slide, please. I think the clicker is about to.
We wore it out
You're
already.
on a-
There we go.
There we go.
So and one thing that's important to keep in mind, your emergency operations plan is not your continuity plan. We call it a COOP. Some businesses call it a COG. That is another cornerstone that the city will be working on. The continuity plan is how you keep doing the business while the responders are dealing with the response. Who's paying the bills, who's keeping the lights on, keeping the phones working, staff staffed. all things that we learned during the pandemic shutdowns. And so in 2024, we'll be doing an update to that plan that we did. Another piece that your operations plan is not is your training plan, which may or may not come up next. Your exercising and training plan is another cornerstone. Plans are meant to be stressed. You are supposed to train and then test them for gaps. Look for places they fail so that you can catch that on a blue sky day instead of a black sky day. We don't have that strategy. Now that we have our EOP, we will now put together a training and exercise strategy. It will be FEMA compliant. Our employees are already all FEMA compliant. Each department will help us work on a priority list. And we will be doing exercises regularly and then make improvements to this plan.
And for, as a clear statement, some of these exercises will be unexpected.
Mhm.
And they will feel very real because they will be orchestrated behind the scenes and then rolled out with little notice.
And some can be very small, like the test of the Everbridge for employees the other day. Very small exercise. So on the next slide, there are a couple things that I wanted to point out to council. There are things you can do to help us in this preparedness venture. Obviously, if you have not already, please read the plan and Appendix A. We will definitely be putting together some job aid emergency folders for council, but also the videos and the short guide that's available online are very helpful. They're generic, but they give you a sense of just how important your role is in emergency to support the staff. If you have the opportunity to attend exercises and drills, please do. We welcome that. We really hope you'll encourage your constituents in your districts to please be 72 hours ready. In an emergency, our responders' job is to save lives, stop the crisis, and then get to the most vulnerable people first. That means the rest of us have to all be 72 hours self-reliant. And then lastly, if you are not signed up for Everbridge and National Weather Alerts, please do so. If your employees aren't, please ask them to be. Coworkers, coaches, church peers, anybody who's playing, living, or working here, because that's how we're going to alert people the most efficiently way that we have a crisis in a region or a street. If we can't get information to people, we cannot keep them safe. And we want them to get it from a reliable source versus, social media. So.
And a key feature of the new plan is that, let's say something starts to kick off and we have an emergency that's unrolling, we will use the base plan to construct the plan for the crisis using elements that are in the appendices. In other words, there is no one set plan. The way it's designed, it's a framework. So if we have a chemical spill, for example, we will initiate those parts of the appendices that we need to as directed by the overarching base plan. So it's a flexible approach. It's not a linear or lockstep approach, and it will give us the ability to respond to the next COVID far more efficiently than we did to the last one. New slide, please.
Last slide. With that, I invite any questions any of you may have about the emergency plan now or anytime in person. You're welcome.
I just have a nerdy question. Okay. What determined in the, I know I don't know what page it was, but the level of risk for each of the categories, like weather, where did you get that determination?
There are a couple things. We have a natural hazard plan that was done. In fact, it'll need to be renewed in 2025. And that identified key risks and hazards for our area. We looked at our response and our abilities and at what level do we start to deplete ourselves beyond the ability to handle emergencies, and then coded them in that framework. And we then worked with our partners, both Yamhill County Emergency Management and Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue worked with us to make sure that where we were looking matched language and category of seriousness with them. So that if we ever had to borrow their staff or they were the incident command, we were all looking at the hazard the same way.
And then as well as that, some of the higher level incidents, which are FEMA regional triggering, well, those are known to be the highest risk because they would activate interstate compacts or whole state responses.
Right, thank you very much.
Nice job.
So moving on is our update on the short-term rental. Is that Clay?
Good evening, everyone. My name's, for the record, Clay Downing. I'm the interim community development director. I'm joined by James Dingwall, who is our assistant planner and is another one of those people who recently joined the team. We're really pleased with, and he helped me put together this research report. So he's going to help and kind of ride along for this presentation too. So thanks for having us up here to talk about this issue. I think that most of you know that this has been kind of coming. We've intended to come and do this research update for a little while because it's come to your attention previously. We created or your council created the short-term rental ad hoc committee previously. Now on the next slide, I want to go over what the recommendations are for today. And so we're just asking you today to receive and file this as an update, receive and file the research paper or the white paper as we call it. So the vacation rental home and short-term rental white paper that's part of this that is attached to the staff report. And then to provide direction to staff on future actions related to vacation rental homes. And one of those things, and I wanted to mention because I know that the short-term rental ad hoc committee is something that's out there. So just keep aware, if that means come back when the committee is ready and more ripe, then that's fine. But that is up to your council to deliberate on and how you want to approach it. So that kind of direction would be great. And then on the next slide, I wanted to highlight a few of the things associated with what we have in this white paper. And I'll end up calling it intermittently two terms. If I say research paper or if I say white paper, I mean the same thing. And if I say vacation rental home or I say short-term rental, I also mean the same thing. So those are just interchangeable terms that get used. So the white paper includes and highlights some of the items that are listed, I guess on item 2 here, background, trends, and the numbers of vacation rentals that we're seeing and the activities that we're seeing and the existing conditions here in Newberg, public comments that we received and went through over the course of it, and then also goes through sample policy approaches from other jurisdictions. Additionally, I wanted to highlight a few of and what's in this update that we'll talk about a bit are some of the recent activities that have occurred. Those included meeting and convening with the short-term rental ad hoc committee, as well as bringing this white paper in front of the planning commission to get their input as well. And then on the next slide. So some of those actions highlighted a little clearer here. I wanted to talk about what the city council has done in recent years, as well as those kind of further past, what happened with the planning commission in the last few months leading out of the summer, and then what's happened recently with the short-term rental ad hoc committee. So most of the criteria and procedures and those things associated with vacation rental homes, those were created and adopted by the city council in 2013. They've been on the books since that time and they haven't changed much. Changed a little bit, but not much. Then in March 21st, 2022 was the last time that this council received an update. And so it's been over a year, about a year and a half since that has occurred. And at that time, the council chose to take no action as a result of the update, but just gave direction to staff to come back sometime in the following year. And then we came up and gave a short we brought forward the planning commission's request for a moratorium to the city council. The city council chose to create the short-term rental ad hoc committee at that time, and that was how that was created. The planning commission initially received the white paper in August of this year, and then later convened and gave us input in September. And you'll see their recommendations are both in your staff report, as well as a later slide in this presentation. And then last, we've met with the short-term rental ad hoc committee, which has been a really good dialogue going forward with those committee members. So really appreciate them giving their time. That occurred on September 28th, November 3rd, and November 13th. And there's another one scheduled on November 30th. And then on the next slide, we have, great. So some of the existing conditions, and this is essentially the policy framework. I do not expect everyone to remember everything that's put up on this slide, but wanted to highlight some of the things. We do have basic definitions, allowable uses, permitting procedures in place, certain approval criteria that are specific to short-term rentals, and then a certain policy associated with non-conforming uses that I wanted to highlight. So a couple of things to understand. Short-term rental or vacation rental operations are only allowed currently in single-family dwellings. They can occur either under a conditional use permit or a special use permit, but that depends on the zoning district or where it occurs in the city. The procedures for those two things are different. So the special use permit goes through a type 2. That's where it's an administrative decision, but there is public noticing. So we do public noticing, receive written public comment, and then basically the criteria that the city has adopted are used to determine whether or not this will comply. In certain zoning districts, specifically in the R1 and R2 zoning districts, which make up the majority of acres of residentially zoned land in the city, that's where we find the conditional use permit criteria, or a conditional use permit. And what happens is when there's a conditional use permit, it needs to go to a planning commission hearing. So there's public noticing that occurs, and then there's a public hearing that occurs. And so the public has an opportunity to come to that hearing and voice their concerns, as well as doing so through written comment. The criteria used in evaluating these we'll go through in more detail on another slide a little later, but we have to say the special use criteria that we use are relatively clear and objective. The conditional use permit criteria are more general in nature. They're intended so that you can determine if something is going to be incompatible with the surrounding uses. But one thing to note is that these permits run with the land. So they do not run with the operator. So if a permit is issued, it will continue existing at that property, even if the person sells the home. And then last, non-conforming uses. One of the things that came into existence with our regulations and the permitting procedures that we have in place is that things are grandfathered and there's no amortization period. So if you were operating before 2013, you get to keep operating in perpetuity. And so that's just a decision point, and that's what the city chose at that time. So I wanted to make sure everyone's aware of it. On the next slide, we're going to go over those criteria a little more closely that I mentioned. So on the left-hand side, we have the conditional use permit criteria. There's only 3 of them. I apologize. The bottom of this slide is obviously a little cut off, but it's a very short statement. I'll even mention it when I get through it, but wanted to highlight that it really goes at a high level through location, size, design and operating characteristics. And so it's really talking about the compatibility of the operation with the surrounding area. That is largely what it's going for. Item B on the left-hand portion of the slide talks about a convenient and functional living, working, shopping, or civic environment. Again, that is a relatively subjective one. You could say that this contributes to those things depending on the criteria. A neighbor might not agree with you, but the argument can be made that it is part of the way that things operate in the city, and it's a normal use that's not going to disturb the neighbors. On the right-hand side of the slide, what we see are the other criteria that are used, again, for all of the vacation rentals, both those going through our type 2 and type 3 procedures. The information on the left-hand side of the slide only applies to those that go to a planning commission hearing. So the things that we see on the right-hand side of this slide, those are, you have to provide a minimum number of parking spaces. It happens to be the same number of parking spaces required of a single-family home. There's required to be regular refuse collection, that the occupancy is based on the number of bedrooms in the house, so only 2 people per bedroom, up to 15 people maximum. And then that you may not have any occupied recreational vehicle, trailer, tent, or other temporary shelter. So you can't use temporary things as your kind of commercial enterprise for a vacation rental home. And then on the next slide, we get into, I think, the numbers. So this is just by the numbers, the last few years that we've had from 2017 leading through this year. Although I wanted to highlight that you can see, obviously, there's been an upward trend beginning in approximately 2021, and then going up even higher and staying high in 2022. So the data that's in the white paper goes out to August, because that's when we initially did that and took it to the Planning Commission. We updated it basically to update some sources that were cited in some tables between the Planning Commission and your council, but those are really the only changes. The other thing, what I would mention though, is 2023 today, we have, it's either 16 or 17 vacation rental homes in 2023 that are either approved already or are in the process. So we are higher in 2023 than we were in 2022. And then on the next slide, thank you. Go ahead.
Do you know off the top of your head how many of those are type 2 and how many are type 3?
Only one is a type 2.
Oh.
So what we're looking at here is kind of a by the numbers associated with these activities. One of the things that we included in the white paper was that we used data that we had. We didn't use stuff that we didn't have much control over or that wasn't particularly reliable. So we used information based on our permitting activity, our business licenses and business license permitting activity, and associated with our transient lodging tax, which you'll hear me refer to as TLT. So one of the things that's kind of interesting, if you look at this sprawl of numbers, I'm going to go to another slide that's going to paint the picture a little differently, but not yet. And so there's a bunch of different ways, depending on these streams and what you want to look at, that you can slice things. But you don't see, so 74 is the total number that we have of operators. 42 are the number that have or have applied for permits as of August. 57 are those that are paying TLT. And just 18 are the ones that have business licenses. So none of those three categories is 74. So that's the biggest one. And on the next slide, we'll show how much they overlap. Next slide, please. So what we have here is you just kind of your basic Venn diagram. So we're showing those numbers again on the next in a different way. And on the next slide, we're going to highlight a couple of those overlap areas. So we only have 12 that are in full compliance with all three of those streams. So that is probably lower than desired in most circumstances. We may not expect absolute perfection from everyone, but we do expect a little better than that. One of the things that we see is those with no business licenses. There's a total of 56 of them, not paying TLT, a total of 17. And those without city permits, it's really hard to tell because we know we have operators, but because things are grandfathered in, we don't know which ones. So it's basically masking the results. We can't tell which ones that don't have a permit should have a permit because if they existed before 2013, it's okay. So that's just how it goes on in perpetuity. So that's what we see on this slide. On the next slide, I wanted to show a map that shows a basic distribution. This map is a little more data than some of the other data because we were creating stuff as we got started and things. So this was actually generated in April. So we would have more dots on the map. And if we ran it again today, but only a few more dots. But what you can see is we've also color coded it to show those that had one, those that where none was received, and those that were in review at the time. Generally, we see a clustering closest to the downtown area. And I would say that those that have not received a permit, there's, to me, kind of a strong sprinkle along the couplet in the downtown area as well. But you could argue that they're kind of scattered throughout the map, so that's not necessarily super consistent. But on the next slide, we see that it's just shown a little differently. So this is just plotted, same data, but shown as a heat map. And again, you see that basically there's the hottest area is those areas spreading just north and south of the downtown commercial area. Probably not super surprising, but something to keep in mind is that we do have residential dwellings in those areas and not very far. It doesn't take you very far to get from downtown to a neighborhood, or there's just residences sprinkled in. So it is not consistent throughout the city. There's areas where it's higher density of the activity and areas where it's lower density of the activity. So on the next slide, we have a slightly different map here that basically what we're showing are the zoning districts associated with this. Those that are in the kind of yellow through orange colorations, those are our residentially zoned properties. Those that are kind of pink through red are our commercially zoned properties. And one of the things I would highlight here, and that we're going to show a little more as we go on, is that those that are lighter yellow are our lower density and medium density residential. And those take up a fairly substantial portion of the property. On the right-hand side of the slide, we show those, we kind of go through the zoning districts, R1 through R4, plus RP, all of our C designations and M designations. And what it shows is the procedures that folks go through depending on where they live. And so those conditional use permits are tied to those light yellow areas. That's the conditional use permit procedure. Whereas the darker orange and the pink areas are those where a special use procedure is required, i.e. you don't have to go to the planning commission hearing, but you still have to do public noticing. And this is something that's kind of a quirk of our use table, but the ME zone shows as prohibited, but if it's blank, it's also prohibited. So all the ones that are variations on industrial as well as commercial facilities and institutional, those are all prohibited areas. So, and then on the next slide, this is another one that I was particularly happy that James put together for us in the map. It basically takes it and shows by procedure how things are distributed. So the orange hashing that you see there, that's all of the areas that you can do one of these operations, but it requires you to go to the planning commission. The areas where it is in a lighter yellow color, those are areas where it's a type 2 procedure in a residential area. And those that are in pink are our commercial areas, again, still a type 2 procedure, so they don't have to go to the planning commission either. And those that are gray, you can't have one. So on the next slide, this is one that I'll definitely want to get some of James's input on what he saw when he looked at these two. So we looked at the public comments. The public comments, we tried to take comments that are inherently qualitative and make them somewhat quantitative, lump them together into buckets and generally categorize what were we hearing, how often were we hearing it. There were about 77 public comments that were received. We flagged them. Some addressed just one of these areas, others addressed several of these areas. But we saw that some of the highest were parking, safety, traffic increases, and noise were some of the most commonly heard ones that we did. I wanted to give mention to the other two kind of runners up in there. We heard livability, neighborhood fabric, and what I would generally call social cohesion. That's the degree to how close you are. That can apply to a single building, a neighborhood, or a city, but it's something that we did hear regularly from folks and that has come up several times at the Planning Commission in discussions about this. And then housing availability also came up as a concern. James, is there anything you want to add about public comments and some of the things you saw analyzing this?
I think one thing we saw that kind of as the numbers are changing, kind of the areas that are consistent across 21, 20 to 22, and then year to date today. And that also kind of speaks to some of the kind of thoughts from the police department about, you know, in 2021 noise was a pretty big factor, and that has decreased, and kind of some of the, you know, follow-up complaints have kind of mirrored, or, you know, not all of the public comments are consistent throughout every single application.
And that's actually a good entrance point for me to mention one thing. I forgot to share, there's a letter from Sergeant Ronnie, who I was going to apologize to from up here. That we received a memo from them after a request that was placed for them to run some data and talk to us about what they saw when they ran some of the numbers of complaints associated with the properties that we know about from our operators, from all that data. And what they saw was that there's not a significant pattern that correlates to higher crime or nuisances or complaints associated with these operations. What they shared was that there were 73 properties associated with it. So I mentioned 74 before. So I think there's a redundant operator, that there's 2 units on a site or something. But on 73 properties, only 8 of them in a 12-month period had complaints associated with them. And of those, there were a total of 14 calls across 8 properties. And so what we saw was that of their total calls throughout the year, there was far less than 1% of the calls were compromised and associated with vacation rentals. And even of those calls, they don't always know what they are. So there were several different types of calls that came in associated with those. Some were concerns about dogs, some were behavioral health issues, or they called it's a BHI, or behavioral health incident. So it doesn't tell me exactly what it was. It just is a general term that they use for those. But one of the things that we often have been telling, whether it's the public or the Planning Commission and even the ad hoc committee, is that right now there's not a close working relationship between the permitting process, the transient lodging tax process, and then the enforcement process associated with either complaints and violations or code compliance or any of those. So everyone's doing the work the way that they're supposed to, but even seeing those compliance numbers, there's probably some improvements that could be made between those to get better outcomes on some of those. So on the next slide. Great. So this is going back a little bit to some of the procedures and is starting to get into comparing it with procedures that other jurisdictions use. So I mentioned before the procedures that we use now. So this kind of lists some of the procedures that we have on the books. A type 1 procedure is purely ministerial. There's no public noticing or public hearing. The only right to appeal is that of the applicant. So this is when people say by right, they're typically talking about this procedure. You're just allowed to do it with your property. You meet the criteria, you get a permit, we say yes to it if you meet it. The type 2 procedure enhances that and does public noticing to the surrounding areas, to the neighbors. And there's an opportunity for public comment. And if someone establishes standing through submitting a public comment and they disagree with the decision that's made administratively, they have the opportunity to appeal that. And they can take it to the next higher decision-making level. Then at the bottom of the slide, we see the type 3 procedures, which is those again are going to typically in this situation, the planning commission, where the decision is made and there's also public noticing associated with it. And so you can see as you look at this on the right hand of the slide though, that there's lots of different ways to slice it. Other cities do it in different ways, whether it's a type 1, type 2, or type 3 procedure. James, is there anything that you think is worth adding on this one, or there's probably more on the next one? Okay. On the next slide, talk a little bit about those procedures. This one, again, I do not expect everyone to read all of the actions on here. This is from our development code. This is the various actions that you can do and what procedures go through them. And so when we go through these, one of the most common things that we see are we do design reviews, but those that are relatively simple, that have a low probability of impacting the surrounding properties of the neighbors. Those are things like single family dwellings, duplexes or triplexes that occur in a residential zone. Those are typically not a big deal. Accessory dwelling units are another one. Other type 1 procedures on that left-hand column, home occupation permits are basically those at-home businesses. So we issue permits for those. And then things like final plats, which is the second step in a 2-step process. So most of the heavy lifting happened in the earlier process. So we go across the slide onto the type 2 process. We see other types of design reviews, things that are basically for bigger projects. The idea is that there may be a larger possibility that you could have something be incompatible with the surrounding uses or bother neighbors. You see things like partitions and subdivisions occurring in that area too. So those are part of the city doing its business, but they are something that we want maybe to do public noticing with or get public comments on in case people have concerns about them. Variances are also a place there. For people that aren't familiar with the term variance, it's basically a procedure that's given to the public to ask for flexibility in the code as long as they meet certain criteria. And then type 3, those are the ones where you really start getting into the areas where there's a much higher probability of something being incompatible. So we're getting into multifamily dwellings, but it depends on the zoning district and whether or not it's something that there's a higher or lower likelihood of incompatibilities. Conditional use permits. The whole point of a conditional use permit is to condition it to mitigate those incompatibilities. So it gives you the opportunity to do that through a decision-making authority, such as your planning commission. Or if it's some of these other things that are on here, you'll notice that some of these have 3 little stars after them. Those 3 little stars are ones where your city council would be making the final decision. Those also often have to do with changes to adopted plans and codes and legislative documents. And then let's go to the next slide, please. All right. This is certainly one where I'm going to want some input from James on some of these. One of the things that I'm really pleased with in the white paper are the case studies that are found in the kind of what I think of as the 3rd section. Because there are so many different ways that jurisdictions regulate these to make it fit for their community, we try to characterize those and share those. And so we've gotten several different types of policies that we highlighted, those that deal with the non-conformance, something like the fact that we grandfather things in versus those that amortize them or say that in some time you have to become compliant. Production policies on how you produce them or regulate them, those that are more density or concentration based, those that are related to how you operate, those that are related to enforcement and compliance issues. James, is there anything you think worth highlighting here on these, or?
I think just one thing kind of in that list of kind of the case studies, there are some very kind of creative, kind of nuanced policies that I think thinking about kind of, how much of the city is in that conditional use process. And I know that the ad hoc committee on the 30th is going to kind of speak to some of the criteria and more kind of specifics, but there, no jurisdiction on this list only has one change that fixes it all. So they kind of have a combination of layering of production versus density versus owner radius. And so, there are a lot of very nuanced ways that the council can kind of think about how to strategically, put fixes near a school or near the commercial zone, or, versus just kind of focusing on one and trying that by itself.
Then on the next slide, we're gonna kind of wrap this up with sharing the planning commission. When they received this white paper back in August and then September, what we asked them to do in the September meeting was discuss and then tie a bow on that discussion so that we can present it to the city council and they can really understand what's come out of that discussion. Are there other things? Sure, they would love to continue talking about this. So the recommendations they have here the first one addresses exactly that, but I'm going to go ahead and read through these. The city council and the planning commission engage in a joint work session to investigate and consider regulatory approaches for vacation rentals. That the city council consider enhanced enforcement of permitting and transient lodging tax activities for improved compliance. That the city council consider enhanced monitoring of violations and complaints associated with vacation rental activities. That the city council discuss the need for regulation based on a density-based cap. That the city council discuss the amortization of non-compliant operators similar to the policy used in Lincoln City. So they had a discussion for almost 2 hours and they managed to boil it down to 5 things because they really wanted to try and put their arms around it. And this was unanimously kind of voted on by them by motion. That was what we asked them to do too. So it wasn't them just picking and choosing. So with that, on the next slide, we'll just kind of restate the recommendations for your council. Is one, this informational update, that's it. And then it was a receive and file for the white paper. And then any direction that you have for staff at this time, we'd be happy to take it. But on the next slide is just our thank you. And James and I would be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
I would just like to state, I have been at a couple of the ad hoc committee meetings. I think the committee is functioning very well. I think it's a good effort that they're putting into it, and we'll look forward to hearing their recommendations and also working with the planning commission. So thank you. Thank you, Clyde. James. So at this point, why don't we take a short break? 5 or so minutes and re-adjourn at about, depending which clock we're looking at, 7:10.
Good evening. My name is April Catan. I work at the wastewater treatment plant and regulatory compliance. And one of those things I do is help to implement the pretreatment program. The city's required to have a pretreatment program. It's been approved by DEQ and we report to them. And occasionally they audit our program. And in the most recent DEQ audit findings, they're requiring the city to revise some and add some code changes to strengthen our legal authority. Next slide. What is pretreatment and why is it important? Essentially, pretreatment is when a business treats their wastewater from whatever process they have before they discharge it into the sanitary sewer. This could be a automotive repair shop that needs to pre-treat their wastewater before it goes to an oil sand separator, a restaurant that has a grease removal device. It could be a manufacturer or an industry that has high pH swings and needs to neutralize it before discharging to the sanitary sewer. And the sanitary sewer in the treatment plant is designed to transport and treat domestic waste. So when we flush the toilet, wash our hands, take a shower, do dishes, laundry, that type of thing. So pretreatment can help protect the sanitary sewer from things like caustic discharges that could eat away the pipes before and cause the city to have to repair those pipes sooner than necessary. Or a discharge that could interfere or disrupt the treatment process at the wastewater plant, and that would be expensive to fix. Or even something that the treatment plant can't treat, and it would pass through directly to the Willamette River. So this when a business pre-treats their wastewater, they're protecting the city infrastructure as well as the Willamette River. And even people, I mean, if something was in the city sewers that mixed and caused unsafe fumes, that's not only harmful for our city workers, that's potentially unsafe for people in that area. And pretreatment also helps protect the city's biosolids, our compost and recycled water. If a business treats their water before they discharge it, we don't have to worry about that thing being in either of those products. So having a pretreatment program helps to prevent any of these from occurring. And that's why pretreatment is important. Next slide. So the first code change is a definition, our definition of pretreatment requirement. We would remove applicable to and replace that with imposed on. Imposed on means you need to do it, which would be in line with a requirement, and it also aligns with the federal code. Next slide. So this one is the definition addition to the city code. It would define what a significant non-compliance means. It would make it clear to businesses what actions would be considered a significant non-compliance. Basically what this says is that if a business is outside of its permit limits 66% of the time, or if they're outside of their permit limits 33% of the time, but they exceed that limit 1.4 times for BOD, TSS, or FOG, or 1.2 times for any other limit that they have. If they caused interference at the treatment plant or passed through to the river or endangered people, or if it caused imminent harm to people and environment, if they were 90 days past a compliance deadline, if they were 45 days past due on a report, or if they purposefully reported inaccurate results. All of those things would be considered a significant non-compliance. Next slide. This one is a code addition. This is the last one for pH continuous monitoring. This also aligns with federal code. This would give a little bit of leniency for continuous dischargers, and that if it's in the process of adjusting pH and it goes out of the pH range for a short time, it wouldn't be an immediate violation. There are limits though, so it doesn't ever go out of pH range to the point where it could cause harm. There are time limits. They cannot be out of pH range more than 7 hours and 26 minutes in a month. They cannot be outside of their pH range for more than an hour at a time. If they are outside of their pH range, they cannot go below the pH of 5. The pH of 5 and below is known to be caustic, or it'll eat away at the pipes. And it cannot be above 12.5. Above 12.5 is considered solid waste or hazardous waste. And this also aligns with federal code. Next slide. So with that, if you have any questions, you can ask me, or if you think of any while you're reviewing the code, you can email me. My contact information is on that last slide.
So when you were talking about the significant non-compliance, you're probably not, your department, do you handle that going out and looking at restaurants that have the grease traps fitted right or cleaned right or something like that? Is that what your department, am I understanding that right?
There is a person that goes out and checks people's records if they're having.
And how often? I've never heard of that, but I don't know if I yeah. Maybe I'm just not walking in the right circles, but is that something that happens very often here in town?
Yeah, it's a requirement for all restaurants to have a grease removal device.
I saw some head nodding. Yes. Okay. I don't know. It'd be interesting. I don't know if I don't want to know names of the businesses, but it might be interesting just as a statistic sometime to bring to the council. How many times in a year are we out of compliance on something? I think that'd be kind of interesting to.
Sort of like citation. May I?
Mhm.
So you're saying you'd like I'd like maybe a summary of out of compliance naughtiness, but obviously without the company's names attached.
Right.
So noted.
Kind of like the government does. You know, have stuff like that.
Do you know how they came up with 7 hours and 26 minutes? That's so specific.
It is, and it's something that EPA studied, and I'm not sure,
Okay.
it's in one of their
It
technical
came down
documents.
from on high.
Yes.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
So next is going to be our water treatment plan closeout presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, I'm just going to start with an introduction of our consultants, Consor. They are here tonight to basically go over the slideshow that's included in the council packet. Chris Manning is the project manager along with Brian Gintor, and basically step through where we're currently at and what has occurred, you know, from sort of start to finish of the groundwater treatment plant, or at least where we are to today. And then I'll be able to answer any follow-up questions about next steps. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to these guys and let them take the floor and then go from there.
Yes, counselors, can you go back 2 or 3 slides, please?
That's
Okay, yeah,
all right.
we'll make up the first couple slides.
So just as a reminder, I'll just start. I'm Brian Ginter, Consor. The groundwater treatment plant project was primarily intended to hit a couple of key items. The first and most important one is to respond to the state's requirement to cover the basins and filters at the existing plant. In addition, updating the plant to current standards addressing seismic resilience, an aging facility, and operational issues. So that was the goal of the project. And with that, I'm going to stop and let Chris pick up here going forward with the initial concept and where we're at.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, you can see here on this first slide kind of what we and working with the city had kind of originally envisioned what one of the key items for this plant was going to be with simplicity in operations, simplicity in equipment compared to the existing water treatment plant. See, I'm trying to remember my slide order now because I think that's, can you go to the next slide? And I think we have the 30% design. So, okay. So I had a comparison of the other sites, but that's okay. So after we worked through 30% design, we got to this stage. So this is a good representation of the facility as it was designed at 30% level. It's a little tough to see everything that's going on there, but there's some keys down at the bottom for the main portions of that facility. And just from a scale standpoint, you can kind of see how they evolved from the previous slide to this one. Generally, what we understood and what we developed into was a more comprehensive facility, both for staffing purposes, the operational support space, as you can see there, as well as more resiliency and redundancy in the treatment process. We did go up, you know, and I'll have it on the next slide. The number of filters increased. There's new processes that we included to be able to eliminate some of the existing treatment processes that exist at the plant. That's mainly on the chemical feed side, storage, trying to eliminate some of the chemicals that are less, you know, preferential for using at treatment facilities due to their general principles and caustic natures. So you can see again, so number one there, the filters, we were always going to have to treat the water through filters. That didn't change. It was really the scale that changed there. Number two, chemical storage and feed, that was similarly always going to exist at some level. Number three is not shown on this one just because of the orientation of the site and the building, but that would be the clear well that would always exist. 4 is the high service pumps. So that's where the treated water would be pumped up to the city's storage tanks. Also a requirement of this facility. 5 is the electrical room, required for anything where we have power. 6, again, operational support space. And then 7 is aeration and booster pumps for the process. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. So here's just a comparison of the two, just bulleted on the main key points here. The original concept was approximately 15,000 square feet was process and the operational support space. We had 6 filters, chemical storage for both chlorine and sodium hydroxide, so that's the pH adjustment. We were anticipating pumping through the treatment plant utilizing the existing well pumps. And then the operational support space was kind of planned on 2 offices, break room, lab, restroom. The original budgetary cost there for the total project was 21.7 million. That was with 17 million of that being for construction. You go to the right-hand side of the page here, the 30% design facility, we're up to 25,000 square feet of total building space. You can see filters increased by 2. We did eliminate the sodium hydroxide. That was one of the preferential shifts that I talked about on the previous slide. Benefit there again is we don't have storage and feed of generally a difficult. Yes, exactly. The name is caustic soda. That's the kind of trade name for it. So not something you typically want to have unless you have to. We needed to include booster pumps for pumping in between processes. And then, as you can see, the operational support space, again, as shown on the previous slide, increased. The cost of the project at the 30% level, our cost estimates came in about 38 million for construction. So a total project cost, at least for the design and construction, of a little over or just under $43 million. Yeah.
I have a question just for clarity. This puzzled me. So the original concept, who was responsible for that? Was it our city engineers, or did they work with Consor on that as well? And then who was involved in all the changes at the 30% design level?
Sure. The original concept, which was a conceptual plan, was coordinated with city staff. And so it was the basic concept for replacing the existing plant in kind. As we moved into design, then we worked with city staff in terms of what would be desired for a long-term facility as we moved through the early phases of design. So the transition all happened in coordination with city staff as the staff thought about the things they would like to have included, those operational efficiencies and some of those safety items that just happened during a design process.
Quick follow-up. So the original design was more of just a new one, but a legacy, just like the one that we were gonna get away from?
It had a lot of the new treatment facilities. It was a modern treatment plant. It just didn't have some of the, I'll say, amenities, for lack of a better word, that ultimately were being added in as we worked through to 30%.
What's the date on the first versus the second? Because I know we had huge inflation spikes due to world events.
Yeah, the initial estimate was developed just before most of the major inflationary impacts we saw. The other estimate was completed this year. So. About 2.5 years from the initial estimate.
Any other questions on this slide? Okay, we can go to the next slide, please.
I'm curious as to why we went from why we went to a building that was 10,000 square feet bigger. We went from 2 offices to 6 and all these break room things. Were these necessary for this plant? I mean, what changed? Our staffing level is not going to grow in that plant.
Yeah, for the operational side, that was all driven by the city staff just looking for, again, the existing plant, has been there for 70 years and looking forward 70 years, what support space would they like to see, would they need? not just for the water treatment plant, but for the whole distribution system side, be able to essentially somewhat mirror what you have at the wastewater treatment plant for an admin space to grow into, as opposed to having, you know, an area where you can operate, but you have one or two offices there and some common space.
So kind of a follow on, if you looked at that 10,000, I imagine a fairly small amount is in the operational area. I mean, it's hard, offices that are 10 by 10, that's only 100 square feet, and you're talking 10,000 square feet. So is it in the extra filters and the booster pumps?
Yes, it's across the board. The support space did more than double. It was
it
actually
was-
almost tripled in size, but yeah, that accounts for about almost 2,000 square feet of the increase. And then the other 8,000 is in, yes, the aeration, the booster pumps, the blower rooms, the additional filters. Yeah, exactly.
So why on the second 30% design, is there a control room there? Wouldn't there be a control room on the other side, on the other one, the original?
So for
What's
these,
the difference in the
Yeah.
control room on this one compared to the first?
Yep. So with modern treatment facilities now, they're primarily done via touchscreen panels on the, on the actual PLCs, as well as laptops, tablets, things like that. More historically, you would have control rooms, if you think of like, the NASA control rooms, where you would have people with stations and built-in infrastructure to operate the facility. It was generally identified that they'd like to maintain that ability to have a hub for operational control of the plant that would not necessarily just be on tablets, on computers, or within the office spaces. Yes. Well, it's in the concept, there wasn't necessarily a control room space identified. Because a lot of the newer plants in this type of treatment process, that's pretty automated. It's fairly automated in the way that it runs, that it operates. You won't typically see control rooms in them, or not. You'll see them more times, or not see more times than you will.
So if typically you don't see control rooms, why do we have it here? On this one,
They asked them.
they asked for one. Okay.
I guess I have a question for the city manager. Were you aware that they were going to put a large conference room, large four restrooms and a large break room in this new building?
No. Previous staff did not choose to share information in a transparent way with me. And therefore, I was unaware of this expansion until Lance brought it to my attention. Going forward, because I recognize this is a failure on my part, perhaps, for being trusting in my youthful naivety as a new city manager, I will be behaving very differently with department heads of all sorts in demanding more detailed information and putting less things into trust. But the failure must be said to rest with myself.
So just one thing to note there, and I'm sure you've seen some of the other projects, the design process is not linear. It's very iterative in how we work through design. We regularly make significant changes between 30 and 60% for this exact reason, because we get to a 30%, we identify things that maybe do not make sense for cost, for schedule, for whatever it is. Typically, we try not to make those changes from 60 to 90%, which is the next interval. But it's pretty common. We get to, we have kind of what we call concept, then we go to 30%, and that's putting it on paper, right? Where you can actually see everything that we're talking about and what people want. You get the costs associated, you get the schedules associated, and then you start looking at what's the priority. And so it's not uncommon for us to get to this level, say, okay, this is everything you want, this is what it looks like. Maybe we should scale this back. And that's the point that we didn't get to, because we said, okay, the costs are just too far beyond where the budget is. And we'll get to other slides where we did kind of reel back and we said, okay, here's some options that we worked with the city on where you get closer to budget and what they look like. But, you know, that's the normal iteration of these projects. So
Is it fair to say that if we eliminated all of the lovely conference rooms, et cetera, you still would have been way over budget?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
So if we focus there, it's probably not going to help us.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
no, that's, it's just a part of the overall, the overall puzzle. So. Let's see here. So let's see here. Was there, I think there was one slide before. Oh, okay. Okay. Just being fluid here. So the other impacts that we did see on this, so it wasn't just a growth of the facility. There was a lot of mechanisms that tied to that increase in cost. The soil improvements, for those who don't know, this is an area of CSE where there's liquefiable soils, requires a pretty substantial amount of ground improvements to make this site both resilient for operations and also seismically resilient to meet the city's guidelines. So, and the DEQ's guidelines. So the original budgeted amount for the soil improvements was 1 to 2 million. The estimated amount at 30% was $4 million. And a good portion of that was the growth, also just the depth and everything else. Once we actually put pencil to paper, it came in at approximately $4 million. The sanitary sewer, the existing water treatment plant is on a septic system. It's out, it's on a septic system. We'll leave it at that. So the city desired to actually connect it to, to the existing main so that it could be treated at the wastewater treatment plant. It's nowhere near existing mains right now, so it was different alignments allowed for it to be 2,000 to 2,500 lineal feet of sewer main. That was a little over $1 million in additional costs. The storm sewer was another one. The existing storm sewer was identified to not be in good enough shape to tie into, so we were looking at potentially a new outfall to the Willamette. That was going to be a $500,000 to $1 million addition. And then that future Bluff Road, we kind of had a design for 2 entrances and exits based on the current condition and current site layout with the road that's there. And then a future road that would go around the opposite side of the facility. So the additional site prep, asphalt, and just being ready to change the frontage of the building from the south side to the north side was about $250,000. And these are just a few of the items. These are obviously the main ones that we pulled out here. It also impacted the cost of the project.
So it seems like maybe 3 meetings back, we were talking about a road that was, yeah. And so that was over by that area and that it came up about the soil and how it could, become kind of jello in an earthquake. So I don't remember, why can we not build a new plant when we get around to it next to where the old one is, so we're not dealing with that? Because where the old one is now, the soil must be different. I'm assuming it's the same, that whole area. Oh, okay. I was thinking we were closer to the river, so then the land wasn't as good. All right.
Yeah, ultimately, that's actually what flagged it for us, was that there are issues at the existing site. And so then as we started looking at geotechnical data at the new property, we saw that it extended there. It's actually worse of an issue closer to the river at the existing plant site.
Just a quick follow-up. So has anybody looked, I'm assuming you guys have probably looked at it, but is there something else that, even if it could be a couple blocks away somehow or farther, that it would cost less and we could just relocate it to land that's more stable? I mean, have we done a study to look at that?
That's a great question. It's actually later in the slide, but yeah, that's kind of the next steps that we're on now. So that property that the water treatment plant, the new water treatment plant was identified to be on. That had already been earmarked, right? The city had purchased it 5-6 years ago, something like that, I think.
Right before COVID, 2020-ish.
Okay, so that was the earmark location. I don't think the extent of the cost associated with the soil improvements for that site had fully been understood at that time. And that was obviously also before inflation, that it would have been maybe $1 million or $2 million, and it would have made sense from a connectivity to the existing facility, the raw water sources there, connections are there. But now that everything is expanding, the sewer connection part of it, the storm sewer, next steps are definitely going to be starting to evaluate other sites. Yeah, that's a great question. Anything else on this slide? So it wasn't all just added cost. I wanted to throw in a few of these because we were actively working with the city, looking for opportunities to save money, looking for cost savings. Because we recognize that, when the building grows, the costs are going to go up. To the extent that they did, we weren't quite prepped, but we knew they weren't going to increase. So we were looking for areas where we could there's 3 here that we identified. There was a few others, but these are again the highlights. There is an existing backwash storage pond and pump station at the existing water treatment plant. So we identified that was in good condition. The pump station was fairly recently built, and so that would be a good opportunity to reuse that pond and not have to build a new one or a new tank. The recycle tank, we originally, not originally, our concept didn't include one, but then as we got into design, we started talking about, should we add a recycle tank to this project? Because, that's being efficient with water use, and you're trying to actually take that backwash water and put it back through the water treatment plant to minimize how much you're discharging out to the wastewater treatment plant. We identified that could happen in a future scenario where water rights were maybe a little bit more strict, and the city was ready to do that. The third is the backup generator at the existing treatment facility. It's a dispatchable generator, so it is tied to grid power, and they actually maintain and operate the generator. So and it's fairly large because it has to be at least 1 megawatt to be dispatchable. Large means expensive. There's a lot of additional air quality requirements. So we did some due diligence to see the expected life cycle remaining for that generator. And the city had deemed that that was sufficient to use the existing. So those are kind of 3. Obviously, they were not as substantial as the increases, hence the net add, but just wanted to point that out. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah, good.
So on the cost up, the cost that went up, there was about 4.25 million that went up and 1.5 that went down. And what we're not seeing is the rest of that 20 million that it went up. Is that later or?
Well, so the rest of the 20 million really came into the additional equipment, the additional size of the plant, it was everything else within that building, right? The building costs, we already captured the soil improvement, but it was everything else within the framework.
So the booster pumps that weren't, and
yes,
okay.
Exactly. The aeration, the blowers, the extra filters, the building itself, was a sizable amount. That was, several $1 million just in building space.
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
yeah. So this point was made earlier. This graph here from Mortensen identifies, this is their most recent through Q2. And you can see, it's kind of hard to see, but Portland area there is one of the highest bars for the increase going from 2020, 21, 22. I think we've seen these charts in various iterations a lot for the last year and a half, but it, as you all know, it didn't skip the construction industry. It's hit there pretty hard. The other thing to make note of here is that specialty construction this is general infrastructure, public works infrastructure construction. Anything specialized equipment, specialized soil improvements, right, where you have specialized teams. has increased substantially more than the average here. We're seeing it on almost every one of our projects. It's a continuation. You can see it starting to flatten out on the curve. I think we're starting to see that a little bit too. The challenge is that, and it's mentioned here in the fourth bullet, for these longer duration projects, right? This is a 3-year project. We have to project out like we're going to still see some increase. We don't want to go to our clients and say, okay, the inflation is done for the next 3 or 4 years. It's going to stay the same, right? So we're still putting in 5 to 7% increases per year into our estimates so that we're being reflective. So, you know, when these decisions are being made, it's based on the best information we have. And so it's not just the costs that we see direct, right? We're anticipating additional costs as we project out 3, 4, 5 years. So we discussed also this a little bit briefly too. These were a couple concepts that we came up with working with the city and with the CMGC as well to work through. CMGC was the contractor slating that we had on this project, and they're a little bit more in line with the original concept. We've got a smaller space, smaller admin space. We do still have some of the process improvements, but we did cut down on the number of filters, things like that. As you can see, the costs did not necessarily get back to that budgeted 21.7, I believe was the original. We were getting more in the, and these are total costs. This is not construction costs. This includes design and permitting. But we were getting back in that ballpark, but it was still above the original budget amount. Yes, yeah, and you can see from an overall spatial footprint from everything, these are substantially smaller buildings footprints. It's not necessarily the same apples to apples comparison, because the 30% design that we had was more of a, I don't know what's the, yeah, it was a full build out. That was a 70-year facility where the city could utilize the space for operations growth throughout and have room to build into, add more equipment, whatever it was. If you look, for those who aren't familiar, the existing water treatment plant, was built in the 50s. It's gone through, I believe, like 8 or 10 fairly substantial renovations, remodels, upgrades since then. And so we try to build out for that space so that every time things aren't having to be recreated, we're not having to, so if we're being forward thinking in our design, we try and make sure there's extra space. We try not to make it so compact that if you have to do something else, you're building new buildings, expansions, whatever that is. So, next slide. Okay, so here's the next steps. This we'll talk down at the bottom there about future sites and evaluation there. So first one, we are working directly with Lance and his team on closeout of the project. That includes talking with the stakeholders, WIFIA, who is the financing agency, Slade and the CMGC, DEQ, the planning team, Clay and his team there, the Energy Trust, Oregon ETO, and SHPO, the preservation. We had a cultural and environmental, or cultural and historical sub for this, because there's old 100-year-old buildings on that site, plus the water treatment plant as well. So we had to close out any of the pre-permitting work that had been done on this project. I believe all of those have been notified at this point, and the closeout has either already happened or is in the works. We will be tying up loose ends from the design. Obviously, we don't really build for coming to a quick halt like we did on this project. So we've got to try and tie up the loose ends, make sure that what we can package up and give to the city has as much value as possible, from here's the design, here's how we got there, here's the value engineering options, here's what they provide and what they present as opportunities. There's obviously some reports, geotechnical report being a big one that we needed to finalize. The goal obviously being that all the work that had been done to that 30% level, we wanted to capture it all and package it in a way that if and when the city is ready to, take that next step, you have something to build off of, and you're not just starting from scratch. Yeah.
If we package up the information nicely, in 8 years, you're just going to do it all again, aren't you? So why are we doing that? It's a fair question, guys. You're going to say things have changed. We need to start over.
There's no question that there's gonna be some lost efficiency. I can tell you that there will be reuse of certain materials. Geotechnical report, for example, if it's 8 years from now, no, you're probably gonna do an additional investigation because things will have changed. The SHPO report will still be valid. That's one that's done and used. There won't be a need to go back and do additional cultural investigations. Survey is gonna depend on what happens with the site or if you move sites. And the 30% concepts would be used as a starting point for a pre-design. So no, it's not going to be picking up at 30% and moving forward, but it would be the basis of that first initial concept and cost estimates. So there would be value, but it's not going to be commensurate with what's been spent. It's not a dollar for dollar, to your point.
Yeah, it's a pretty minimal. We're really just trying to take what's there and put it together. It's, it's mostly my time, to be honest, where I have to take everything that everybody's done, put it in a nice clean thing, write up a quick tech memo and say, here's what you have, here's what was done, here's why we stopped, here you go. And so, from a percentage, and this was kind of talked through with the city's team in terms of how do we best capitalize on the work that was done so that whatever is decided in the future, if it's moved sites, if you go, I don't think surface water is in them, but there's things that could happen that could minimize the value. If the existing site is identified to keep moving forward there, then a lot of what design has happened could be built off of. So, because there's a lot of iterations in how, like, we probably had 4 or 5 iterations to get to that 30% design you see there. In terms of layout, in terms of configuration of a lot of the process decisions that were made, a lot of the calculations that support that. So it's just trying to put a bow on it so that it says, no matter what you do, here's what has been done. So you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel for all of it.
So how much is the work to this point going to cost the city?
To package that up,
Don't have that number tonight. That's
for the design that's happened so far, as I was saying, through 30%.
For everything we spent with you guys?
Yeah, so with us and our whole team, I don't really actually, if I throw you a number, it may not be right because I haven't looked at our numbers on that, but it's, I think it's in the $800,000 range, somewhere in there. So that's with, the geotech, the structural, the civil, the survey, that's not necessarily just us, but that's across the board.
So if we were to look at another location where it makes it convenient to hook up to all the piping infrastructure, that type of thing, who does that? Is that something that you do, or Will, is that something that, do we have engineers that are capable to at least be able to kind of figure out where we could go?
I don't really know the answer to that question right now. I think it's a lot of it depends.
I mean, just quick follow. I think that that's important. I mean, for us to be able to figure out, we should be looking at that. I think that's the next step in the process, would be to figure out, where do we go where the land is going to be stable and makes it easy to hook up to the infrastructure. I think that's something we need to look at.
So, I mean, at the moment, my direction to staff is to contain any remaining residual cost. So I'm assuming you guys heard that memo.
Yep.
So that's what I want. And we're going to start again. And when we start again, we're going to have a lot less debt on the city's books for old projects, because we're going to need a lot more money somehow. And that's going to be the battle of the next 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, and I know there has been some discussions, and from an internal standpoint in terms of starting to at least look at what other sites could be. There's, as you know, if there's right of way procurement, if there's things that you have to do ahead of time, then those can take some time. So, it is things that we do, you know, that's something that we do for clients, but that's also something that can be done in-house if you have the staff to do it. So, I do, yeah. So the compliance with DEQ, that's obviously still there. That doesn't go away because the project goes away. So the city's on a compliance schedule for 2027. That's primarily driven by the basins and the filters and just getting them covered. Right now, with them being exposed, the DEQ considers the plant to be a surface water treatment plant from the standpoint of it has exposed water to rodents, birds, insects, all that. So getting them covered in some fashion will still need to happen by or an extension would need to be requested from the DEQ on that compliance schedule. I know the city's looking at concepts there. Consort also talked with the city originally and developed some initial concepts. That's actually one of the first steps of this project, and how this project evolved was looking at covers, and then it evolved to, well, the seismic resiliency that we talked about at the existing site and what it would take to make that site, that building seismically resilient. Essentially all of that turned into this should probably be a new treatment plant, combined with it being a 70-year-old treatment facility. So yeah, next steps, sizable costs with the site, the ground improvements, the sanitary and storm sewer connections, and then that Bluff Road, alternative sites will be evaluated. And as I mentioned, we're obviously still in the infancy, the city's in the infancy of this, how this project is evolving. So I know that's something that's being worked on, but it will take time. And then new financing options as well. Obviously that's something that will be looked at down the road, including or as opposed to the WIFIA funding that was looked at on this project.
Gentlemen, thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, next on our agenda is our consent calendar. It has two items. The first one being a rather large number. Does anybody wish to discuss that item, or should we move on to the consent agenda? We need a motion.
Motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The motion passes. All right, continued business. A resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a change order to close out the Elliott Road Improvement Project in a big number. I was expecting Will. Hello, Lance. Hi, Paul.
How about Will leads off? So you're going to hear a little bit today about the reasons for why this project has gotten over budget. And once again, in my opinion, I probably should have been more intimately involved in the detail of this project, but I trusted that I would get good information along the journey, and that may not have actualized. So I apologize about this. I'm responsible for everything the city does and fails to do. And so this is on me more than anybody else.
I will start off again. My name is Lance Calvert. I'm the city engineer. One thing I would mention from the prior presentation before we get started here is that I am an eternal optimist and I am a glass half full person. The problems, the challenges with the water plant, I think there are ways that we can get through that. And I think that it also opens up the door for other opportunities. So while it may be sort of doom and gloom kind of thing today, I think eventually we'll get through it and we will see great success there. I have a lot of ideas. Councilor McBride's ideas are right on target, and I think we'll get through it. Now, moving ahead to this one, Paul Chu, our senior engineer, is with me today. He's
Lance, hold on just a minute. I just want you to know that statement makes me very happy. I was feeling like nobody here had the expertise to find a way to get that done. And so anyway, thank you. I appreciate the encouragement.
Yes, thank you, and we'll get through as much as we possibly can, and I treat every city dollar like it's my own. It's the way I was born and raised, so if there's an expense, it's because I believe in it, and hopefully we can defend that. So moving forward to these requests for council action on hand. It's really about a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute the change order to close out the Elliott Road Improvement Project. As you know, the Elliott Road project has been going and ongoing for quite some time. Again, I would say this is a really big project, a really hard project for a community this size, and really requires a lot of great partnerships, which I believe, unfortunately, we have not necessarily seen, particularly in the utility franchise community that we have here. So that'll be something to talk about as we move forward. For tonight, what we're really asking the council to act on is to approve the funds that the Saunders Company, the contractor, is due for work that they have already completed. So we're coming at you a little bit behind on this one, just because of schedule and how things worked out. We do plan on having Kittleson, the lead design engineering firm on the project, here at your next council meeting on December 4th to go over a lot of the details and provide a lot more presentation on sort of dissecting the project and figuring out where we go next steps. I think there's some ways that we can potentially recover some funding here through other means and channels. So I'll let Kittleson work on that and share that with you when we get to that on December 4th. Tonight, it's really about approving work that's already been done. You can see in the agenda packet the original contract price with the Saunders Company of $5.848 million. The council had approved a change previously that raised the total project cost for construction to $6,031,000 and some few dollars. Where we are landing today is $6,961,000 in total. There's been several change orders to the project, significant change orders. As of today, most of those change orders were able to work through the city procurement and purchasing policy. At this point, we're beyond really authority, so that's why we need council action for the remaining items, or really the remaining payment to Saunders. Big takeaways here are really a couple of items: franchise utility costs to relocate and underground and shift their facilities. Substantial changes. There was a lot of mislocates, substandard locates, incomplete locates. Paul had to manage all that with Kittleson and Saunders. I think the Saunders really went above and beyond to try and help out here, and particularly as a local company. But when you have utility companies that completely don't mark their utilities, or mark them 10 to 20 feet away from where they actually are, it generates a lot of extra work on the part of the contractor and a lot of extra costs. And when we discover these things, whether that's additional conduit, whether that's additional traffic control, whether that's additional excavation, a lot of extra potholing where we're trying to find these things as we go. So all this was occurring, during the construction season, while you're actively under construction. And then simultaneously with that, you have the Newberg High School project. The school project overlapped with the road project. That really sort of forced the city to open up a lot of the area of Elliott to construction, through construction to traffic. Originally, in the original bid and design, there was supposed to be several, I think, months with no access where people would only get access from the side streets or the school would only get access from the other school entrance. That shifted after construction to keeping that street open. So again, a lot of additional cost in traffic control, a lot of flaggers out there on the site for a very extended period of time. Adjacent property owner coordination was also a big key component. Obviously, I think it's staff's goal to meet the needs of the adjacent property owners throughout the construction. Whenever you're shifting and changing things, utility coordination, moving things around, that generates additional expense. There was a lot of extra landscape detail and work, a lot of detail through construction on matching elevations, adjusting elevation grades, retaining wall additions that were made to meet the needs of the adjacent property owners versus sloped property. And again, a lot of coordination with utilities. Paul is here and he can certainly expand on any of these topics. Again, we'll have Kittleson here in the next council meeting to dive into more of the details, provide some pictures of some of the issues and sort of next steps. But we're both here to answer any questions.
I'm guessing by the looks on everybody's faces, we all gotta feel the same. There's no point in trying to beat you guys up over it. The money not gonna be recouped, although I understand you are trying to recoup some of the money from the locate company and so forth. Good luck with that. I mean, let's try to do better next time is all I can really say about it. But it is what it is today, so.
I guess I do have a question. How typical is it to see a project scope this far out of budget like that?
I would say untypical. I have not seen very many in my career, almost 30 years, probably Paul, same, that get that far off from their original scope. It can happen, various, obviously in this case, unknowns in the underground utility world really stress the project limits. Anything else, Dan?
Yeah, if I can mention what the Saunders company said to me. They have a very talented superintendent on this project. And I was thankful for him being there to be sort of my partner, I guess, for this project. He mentioned that of his 30-some years of project experiences, this is the worst of the worst. I never seen that in my whole life before on how messed up the utility relocates are. For instance, the PG line mark on Elliott Road, not far from the Horn's property. And it doesn't say it's abandoned or not, so the contractor dig it out and then it happens to be in a conflict and took PG a couple of days to get back with us saying that no, it's abandoned and just get a big snapper and cut it off. And while we're waiting for a day or two just to find out, and then it's dehardening. And there are also areas where there are no locates for the PG power line contractor dig it out and actually scratch a live PG line. And thank God nobody got hurt or electrocuted. And there are places where they are marked and they excavate, look around 3, 4, 5 feet away, and there was nothing to be found. And we also have a water line on the east side of Elliott Road between Hayworth and the high school, where it is designed accordingly. And the design was according to the utility locate that was done during the design phase. We put the water line in there, we scratch it out, and then boy, there's a telecommunication line in there right smack in the same area. And so a contractor has to sort of pick up that thing there, move a little bit, put the water line there, and then put it back in there. Is the direct buried line that was never located at all. So this slowed down the production tremendously. And so you have to be very patient with that and be very savvy with using all the experiences that anybody can have. And we have seen places where there's a gas line, power line, they're almost not too far away from each other. You could say, how can a gas line and a power line almost like next to each other? That something wasn't right. And then contractor go out there, the locate, the fourth time, the fifth time, there are new locate marks on the project. I mean, fifth time, sixth times, new ones, what's going on here? So I'm just telling you a little bit of the challenges.
Yes, so I think, certainly for whatever reason, I think the utilities just don't have the greatest knowledge of their infrastructure in this area. So in the future, I'm sure that we will be very strategic in a similar type of project to look at those utilities, try and get through that early in the design process with them as partners. And in particular, if we're seeing mislocates or in the walkthrough, which is typical during the design phase of the project, any kinds of challenges or issues, we may require the utilities to do a more exhaustive locate than just the traditional marking. There are different providers that can do that use basically like sonar type of equipment to find things out there. And so typically that's not required as most utilities have a pretty good idea of where their stuff is. But in this case, I would be very sensitive to that, I think, moving forward on a future project of this scale and magnitude. I think for now it's lesson learned and obviously the cost is there. We would have been paying these prices. Luckily, Saunders is honoring their unit pricing costs for a lot of these overages. So again, they're a good partner. But certainly some definitely lessons learned for future design projects.
Can I go ahead and propose a resolution? Propose a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a change order to close out the Elliott Road Improvement Project in the amount of $638,434.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. All right, Mr. Tault, we're up to your item now. Do you want to speak first, or do you want to hear the presentation and then speak after that? That'd be fine. Thank you.
Okay, let's see how that's working. Okay. All right, Jim Tault speaking. Good evening. I figure you've read my October 24th public comments to the Newberg Affordable Housing Commission. Also attached to this agenda item is a page titled Supplemental Info. These were talking points I sent to CM Worthy prior to a meeting we had last week. Tonight, I'm going to highlight a few of those points. The Housing Authority of Yamhill County has been managing Newberg's manufactured home grant program for the last 18 months, about 18 months, and it's now winding down. 40 plus homeowners have been helped. However, there are 50 homeowners still on the wait list, and probably others who didn't bother applying because of the Oregon clause that prevented helping anyone in a home built before 1978. I'm here tonight to ask you to give CM Worthy the nod to explore extending this program using CET funds and without that onerous 1978 clause. Now, I know there's an opinion that CET funds cannot be used for this purpose. So I'm reading now directly from the Newberg Municipal Code regarding the CET. Section 3.60.90 titled Use of Funds. I should really have this so I can see James while I'm talking. Paragraph D, and that's what I'm reading. Quote, the city may fund affordable housing programs in accordance with Section 9, Chapter 59, Oregon Laws 2016, including but not limited to 1, rent buydowns and subsidies, down payments assistance, foreclosure prevention assistance. So the words but not limited to give you discretion. The discretion to make additional choices. Our manufactured home parks are arguably the largest single source of affordable housing in Newberg. The Newberg Affordable Housing Commission's housing program matrix has, as one of its goals, the preservation of manufactured homes. This proposal is about the repair and preservation of those manufactured homes. Please use your discretion. Give CM Worthy the nod. I believe Newberg and the Housing Authority of Yamhill County could collaborate to create a new contract with cost savings for both parties and thereby continue helping Newberg's manufactured homeowners. The current program is winding down, but it is still operational. All it needs to be done is tune up that contract and put more fuel in the tank. So there's more that can be said. There's a lot of city code here, but I'd like to reserve the balance of my time if I've got some. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. We'll call you if we need you.
Okay, thanks.
So now we have presentation.
That's me.
That's you. Okay.
For this, I'd like to just begin with an executive summary of the situation. Currently the city has a final balance from the CET funds of 1.57 million that it can use for allowed purposes. As you know, 15% of the funds collected have been distributed to the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department to fund their various programs. 50% can be used to fund developer incentives under subsection C, and that comes to approximately $785,000. 35% can be used to fund developer incentives and affordable housing programs under subsection C and D of that section, to a total currently on the books of $549,500. While there may be some legal hurdles to navigate, staff recommends scoping this concept further and having it continue under the authority of the Affordable Housing Commission. And to that point, I just wanted to kind of get into this a little bit further. Obviously, I'm in favor of this as a broad concept. I think this is a good concept, and I'm hoping that the council feels the same way. However, having received some legal information, their summary of their conclusions is that the city cannot use the CET funds allocated to developer incentives to fund mobile home grants. But, and here's the but, the city may be able to use CET funds allocated to affordable housing programs to fund the mobile home grants. And here's the legal caveat, and James will probably expound on this a little further in a minute. If the city determines that the mobile home grants make the cost of housing affordable versus simply making the housing units habitable, in other words, that's some kind of testing mechanism that would have to exist. And second, if the city is able to identify a method for evaluating eligibility, once again connected to the definition affordable housing. Now, sometimes I get something right, not so much lately, but I will say that one idea did come to my mind, which is perhaps, and this is just a concept which will require further scoping, perhaps if we were to agree that the contracting agency would give the applicant a certain number of months of free rent, and in exchange, they would do the repairs to bring the property back up into a usable condition, that might be one way to thread this needle as affordable. So in other words, it would create an affordability effect and at the same time do the extremely laudable good improvements that Mr. Tault has suggested we consider. This is just a notion off the top of my head. And we'd need to scope it further if it is the will of council that we do so.
I have it seems to me affordable housing in this context should be fall to the meaning 80 to 120% of the average median income. Is that not the case? I mean, do we need to prove that these houses are in that area? That's easily done.
Mr. Mayor, I think there's two sources of authority that the city is trying to navigate here. One is the ordinance that Mr. Tault already quoted to us, but the second is the state statute that sets up the construction excise tax. And so when you're looking at those two sources of authority, there's a question that arises as far as what constitutes an affordable housing program. In looking at the city authority, the old language does explicitly call out an 80% median family income paired with a 30% rental expense tied to that 80% MFI. So there is a component or an element here where from the city's attorney's office, if council wanted us to scope this, there's an eligibility component in looking at the incomes of the grant recipients themselves. There's a second piece here, which is kind of draws itself out in the state statute, which is a given program an affordable housing program in terms of impacting or lowering the cost of housing versus improving the condition or the habitability of the housing units themselves. And so that's what I hadn't heard your suggestion, Mr. City Manager, but it is a good one worth looking into. And so
only thought of it this afternoon.
yeah, so if we're looking at the cost, that gets into a lot of the programs that were already kind of explicitly spelled out in Mr. Tault's public comments. So when you're talking about rent buy downs, when you're talking about down payment assistance, avoiding foreclosure, those are programs that are explicitly listed because they, in looking at the context, impact the cost of the housing itself. If we're improving a facility by adding a ramp or, improving, the condition of stairs or heating, that may not be a direct impact on cost, certainly habitability, and certainly you can make an argument that it's tied to cost, maybe not as directly, but the city would have to be comfortable making that assertion or making that argument in response to a challenge.
Well, let me offer that. I think in the context of affordability, in a lot of cases, if these repairs don't get done, this homeowner is definitely in jeopardy of not being able to continue to inhabit the house. Therefore, the alternative would be a much more expensive rent in some apartment complex someplace rather than staying in a house that they already own. Would that sort of thing qualify?
Well, that's the argument we'd have to make, Mr. Mayor, is along those lines. The challenge here is we don't have anything explicitly spelled out by statute or in the ordinance to say that. Mr. Tault's point about the language including but not limited to is what we would have to rely on and make the argument that you just shared.
So I guess, well, go ahead, Peggy.
Yeah, but I'm going to get into the weeds just a little bit, James, because I think you know this enough to follow. I dug around a lot this afternoon, and in our municipal code, section 3.60.030 B, residential improvements, at the end of that statement, it references Oregon statute 3.20.1953. So I went and found that. And it's just about deposit of revenues, but at the very end of that particular page, it references Oregon laws 2016, chapter 59, section 9. That's where I thought I might have hit the gold mine. The very end of section 9, number 4, it talks, well, first in 3C, it talks about 35% for programs related to affordable housing. Then if you go down to 4, it talks about the remaining 50% received through CET to fund programs of the city or county related to housing. The word affordable is not there. So it seems to me these are all 3 linked. Burst my bubble.
I'd have to look at the text, particularly on the chapter reference in the legislature, just because from the 2016 session, those particular items have been codified, so I'd want to line it up with the statute itself. But I'm happy to drill down on that, Councilor Kilberg.
So I guess what we need to tell staff is whether or not we think this is something that's worth pursuing. Is there anybody object to that, Molly?
Just a question. So we're supposed to get, last June, we tried to spend CET and the problem was raised that the Affordable Housing Commission is supposed to bring us a list of opportunities that we can, make a difference in our community. And I'm assuming this could be one of them, but are they meeting? Are they going to come present anything? Because I don't want to make one-off decisions. You raised that last time, Peggy raised it. It's like, we should understand what our options are before we spend this money, and then we should spend it. So are they coming?
Yeah, that's exactly where we're going. If nobody objects, or if there's no strenuous objection to pursuing this plan, if we think it's a decent idea, then that's what we're gonna do, is ask Will to take this to staff and then bring it back to us through the Affordable Housing Committee.
But not just this plan. They had other things they were looking at for developer incentives. Cause there's a pot of money there that's just sitting there because they weren't meeting. I'm not quite sure what was going on there, but are they functional? Because there's the whole amount that we could be helping people build affordable housing. Not just this project, this could be one of them, but is that committee meeting?
Hang on, Jeff. Yes, they are meeting. They have met. They will continue to meet.
When is there, is it on the website? I can look it up.
Yeah. Whether or not we want them to create a different plan, that's again, more discussion that we can have in the future. But at this point, let's talk about this one. Do we want to continue with this? Or
Sure. I mean, yeah, refer it to the committee. It's just, when are they going to come back?
go ahead.
I support it in the form I think that was recommended by City Manager Worthy to go through the committee and to come back as a recommendation of the committee. At that time, I think it'd be great to hear an update on where they are on the other items too.
Agreed.
Mayor?
Yeah.
I would agree, but I'd also like to find out if there's anything in this law, because it would make it a lot simpler. I think if these are linked, if these 3 pieces are linked. So I'll get a hold of James tomorrow. We could maybe find out quickly. But so both or whichever one survives.
So yes, I'm happy to, with council's approval, to work on the authority that Councilor Kilberg pointed out. I just want to make sure that it's clear for staff that it's the expectation that the Affordable Housing Committee would come back on all of the dollars, development incentive dollars and the housing program dollars, or.
So we don't have to stack it up into a big presentation. That wasn't my intent. My intent was they have a list of things for affordable housing. If there are other things they already have, bring them at the same time. Let's get going on this, because we're just sitting on it and it's not doing any good. So do we have to wait till they exhaustively? No, this can come. Yeah.
If I recall correctly, the last time there were only 2 applications and they brought those to us. So I don't think there's anything pending. I don't think applications are piling up. Jim was at their meeting, which was fairly recently.
Yeah, that's, they have 3 different funds actually. So They are planning to meet in December, I believe, to allocate the funds from the other two. So the question is, do we want to start working on this? I don't see any reason. I mean, it's not burning a hole in our pocket. I would like to use this money for something that will make a real difference for affordable housing. I don't want to spend it just to find a project for it. So that would be my recommendation in the future. Go ahead, Will.
So kind of building on what James said. So we will work on this idea, but also if they do have some other concepts that are spooled up, we can bring those back at the same time. And who knows, there might be other new ideas that might get spooled up in the meantime. So I think we've got probably what we need.
Mr. Tault, did you have anything else you wanted to say? You can if you want, sure.
Let me say, Commissioner, Counselor Kilberg, I am so glad that you read chapter 59, section 9. And I'm glad you pulled that forward. I didn't want to get down into that so much, but certainly you hit the two really important operative paragraphs, which is paragraph 3C, which without reading the whole thing, is a little hard to get the context, but I think you'll get it. It says 35% of programs and incentives of the city or county related to affordable housing as defined by the city. So I think that's pretty important. And the next one down relates to the amount that gets paid out of taxes that are collected from commercial and industrial real property improvements. And it stipulates 50% for affordable housing, but it doesn't really define affordable housing. And this seems like a good time to bring up another point that I was not going to bring up because I didn't want to, make it any more complex than it already is. But I think it's possible that there's a misconception about how these funds can be allocated. And if you read the law, and this is supported on our own website, our code says that that payout formula, which is 1535.50, is only applied to taxes collected from residential programs. Taxes collected from commercial, industrial, or mixed use work is not subject to that payout schedule. And I just say that so that you understand that, because you don't want to get down the road and find out later we paid out the wrong amount, and then you have to rewind that somehow. That'd be awkward for everybody. So anyway, thank you very much for your time, and I hope, again, please use that discretion that the Newberg Municipal Code gives you. Thanks a lot.
That does bring up a question I've had on the same subject, Will. Have we been tracking the money as far as residential and commercial developments?
I am unaware if that has been tracked. I would have to get back to you with an answer. Sorry, Honorable Mayor Ruzaker.
I suspected that was the case. I read it the same way he did, and it appears to me that we have some accounting to take care of before we decide how much money we have in which fund. So that being said, is there any new business from any of the council members? Seeing none, meeting's adjourned.